Zara Campbell was a woman whose life was measured in late-night shifts and overdue rent receipts. Her only goal was to survive Seoul with her dignity intact and save enough to bring her mother from Jamaica for medical treatment. But on a humid summer night at the Imperial House, she found a wallet, a sleek piece of black leather stuffed with enough cash to change her life. The owner was Lee Minji, a man whose name alone made Seoul's underworld bow in fear. What Zara didn't know, as she picked up the restaurant phone with trembling fingers, was that she hadn't just found a lost item. She had stumbled into a calculated, high-stakes test. Returning the wallet was the right thing to do, but it was also the first irreversible step into a world ruled by a tattooed kingpin who only rewards those he can control. Before we dive into Zara's story, if you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. And hey, my best friend told me I'll never hit 1,000 subscribers. Telling these stories helped me prove them wrong by hitting that subscribe button. Let's show them what this community is made of. Zara Campbell was an anchor in a turbulent sea, though if you asked her, she'd say she was just trying not to drown. At 24, she balanced the polished silver trays of the Imperial House, one of Seoul's most exclusive dining lounges, where a single bottle of wine cost more than her monthly rent, with the relentless weight of responsibility that came with being the eldest daughter of a Kingston single mother fighting breast cancer 7,000 miles away. She was practical, focused, and understood the value of money with the kind of clarity that only comes from genuine scarcity. Usually the carefully folded one-notes she tucked into envelopes every month marked Mama's medicine in her neat handwriting. Her hair was always pulled back into a sleek, professional bun, but on her days off, she'd let her natural coils free, a magnificent crown that caught sunlight and reminded her of home. The small Jamaican flag pin on her collar, gold, green, and black, was the only piece of home she carried in this neon-lit foreign city. Her easy smile and melodic accent were a welcome contrast to Seoul's polished, guarded formality, and regulars often requested her section just to hear her warm, good evening that sounded like sunshine. She was driven by an uncompromising vision. Her mother, healthy and smiling, standing in a proper hospital with real treatment options, maybe even here in Seoul where medicine was advanced and hope wasn't rationed by poverty. That dream was her North Star, but the path to it was a punishing marathon through minimum wage, maximum effort, and the constant fear that time would run out before she could save enough. Scene set up, 11:47 p.m. It was nearing midnight at the Imperial House, and the dining room was winding down to its final act. Zara wiped down the last high-top table near the window, her shoulders aching beneath the crisp black vest and white-collared shirt that made up her uniform. Her feet throbbed a familiar, dull protest against the polished marble floors that looked elegant but felt like concrete after a 10-hour shift. The restaurant was a study in controlled luxury. Crystal chandeliers that refracted light like trapped stars, dark wood paneling that absorbed sound and secrets, and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the glittering Han River. It was the kind of place where power brokers closed deals over aged whiskey, and where silence carried more weight than words. She glanced toward the last occupied booth, booth 14, tucked in the corner near the private dining alcove. The man sitting there had been her final customer of the night, and everything about him had felt wrong. Not wrong like dangerous, though there was that too, but wrong like he didn't belong in the predictable pattern of wealthy businessmen and celebrity clients who frequented the Imperial House. He was a study in controlled menace. Dressed in a black three-piece suit tailored so precisely it seemed molded to his frame, he had an almost feral elegance. His dark hair was styled back sharply, revealing a face of sharp angles, high cheekbones, a defined jawline, and eyes so dark they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. But it was the tattoos that truly set him apart. Intricate black ink crept up from his collar, winding along his neck like dark vines, dragons. Korean script, symbols Zara didn't recognize but instinctively knew carried meaning. In this world of carefully concealed power, his markings were a deliberate declaration. He'd sat for nearly 40 minutes, ordered only a single glass of soju served neat, never touched his phone, and watched. Just watched. The room, the exits, the staff. His gaze had passed over Zara twice, each time lingering just a fraction too long, enough to make her instinctively straighten her posture and double-check her service. When he paid, he'd placed a stack of crisp bills on the table, far more than the drink cost, and left without a word, without waiting for change. His movements smooth and soundless like smoke dissipating. His presence had left a wake of unease, the kind that made the other servers exhale in relief when he finally exited through the heavy glass doors. The discovery. 11:52 p.m. As Zara approached booth 14, clearing the untouched glass and wiping condensation rings from the black granite tabletop, her hand swept along the deep leather seating. Her fingers brushed against something solid wedged between the seat cushion and the curved booth wall. It was a wallet. Not just any wallet, this was a piece of art. Made of supple black leather with a subtle pebbled texture, it had the weight and quality of something crafted by hand, designed to last decades. The edges were pristine, the stitching invisible, and embossed in the corner in subtle silver foil was a symbol Korean characters she couldn't read, but that radiated exclusivity. A wave of instinctive dread washed over her. She slid into the booth and opened it carefully, her heart hammering against her ribs. Inside wasn't the chaos of a normal person's wallet, no crumpled receipts, no coffee shop loyalty cards, no photos of family. Instead, there was stark, terrifying order. 3 things. Cash thick, sequential stacks of 100,001 bills, roughly $100 USD each, held together by a heavy silver money clip engraved with a tiger's head. She didn't count it, but her experienced eye estimated at least 5 million, about $4,000 USD. An ID card laminated, official-looking, with a photograph of the tattooed man. The name read, Lee Min-ji. The address listed was in Gangnam, one of Seoul's most exclusive districts, the kind of neighborhood with private security and gates that didn't open for people like her. A single black metal card heavier than credit cards, with a matte finish. No bank logo. No name. Just an engraved Korean symbol and a 10-digit number etched in silver on the back. The combined weight of these items screamed not just wealth, but power, danger, secrets, internal conflict, the calculation. The temptation arrived like a whisper in her ear, smooth and seductive. 5 million. 5 million won. That was her mother's surgery, the mastectomy the Kingston Public Hospital kept delaying. That was 6 months of medication. That was a plane ticket to bring Mama here to Seoul, where treatment wasn't a luxury. That was the difference between hope and helplessness. Her future, the one where her mother lived, was sitting in her trembling hands. She could take it, pocket the cash, toss the wallet in the river on her way home, and by tomorrow, the money would be converted, transferred, and saving her mother's life. The man Lee Min-ji clearly had more. Men like him always did. He probably wouldn't even miss it. But then, cutting through the temptation like a machete through sugarcane, came her grandmother's voice. Miss Ivy Campbell, the woman who raised her in a tiny Kingston tenement with a firm hand and an iron moral code. Zara Simone Campbell, you listen to me good. There is no peace in stolen comfort, you hear me? You take what's not yours, and it will eat you from the inside. You sleep soundly on your own dime, child. Your own dime. That voice raspy from years of selling mangoes on the roadside, but unyielding as steel was louder than desperation. Zara closed the wallet with a sharp snap, her decision made. She had to return it. But this wasn't a simple lost and found situation. A wallet with this much cash, this much weight, this much implication, this wasn't dropped by accident, and the man who owned it, with his cold eyes and silent menace, wasn't the type you handed things to through lost and found. She couldn't trust Mr. Han, the night manager, a man whose gambling debts were whispered about in the break room, who'd absolutely pocket a finder's fee and claim ignorance. Mailing it was absurd, too sensitive, too risky. The police? In a city where powerful men operated above the law? That felt like signing her own deportation papers. Then she found it a business card, tucked into a sleeve inside the wallet. Minimalist. Expensive cardstock. No company name, no title. Just a name in English and Korean. Lee Min-ji. And a single phone number. The call, 11:58 p.m. Zara walked behind the hostess stand, her palms slick with nervous sweat, the wallet feeling heavier with each step. The restaurant was empty now, the kitchen staff cleaning up, the lights dimmed to half power. She picked up the landline phone, its weight somehow comforting in the surreal moment. She dialed. The phone rang once, just once. Then a voice answered, male, rough, and devoid of any pleasantry. Speak. Zara swallowed, forcing her voice to sound professional and confident, not terrified. Good evening. My name is Zara Campbell. I'm a server at the Imperial House restaurant in Gangnam. I believe one of your associates, Mr. Lee Min-ji, left his wallet here tonight at booth 14. Silence. Not the pause of someone thinking. This was the silence of assessment, of a background check being run in real time using nothing but her voice, her name, and the nervous hitch in her breath. It stretched 5 seconds. 10. An eternity. Finally, hold. The line clicked to a different quality of silence, still connected, but empty, waiting. Then a new voice came through, and Zara's entire body went rigid. It was him. The voice was deep, smooth, and cold like water running over stone. There was a refined Korean accent, but his English was perfect, each word chosen with surgical precision. And beneath the surface calm was something darker, absolute authority. "This is Lee. You have something of mine, Miss Campbell." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact delivered with the confidence of a man who was never wrong. "Yes, sir," Zara replied, her throat dry. "You left it in booth 14 after your drink tonight. It has your identification and some cash inside. I wanted to call so I could return it safely to you." Another pause. Then, "You could have kept it." The words landed like a test. There was no emotion in them, just cold observation. "The contents are valuable. You work as a server. I'm aware of your position, your need." The casual dismissal of her struggles stung, but Zara kept her voice steady, anchoring herself to the principle that had brought her this far. "It's yours, sir. My position doesn't change the fact that it's the right thing to do. I can hold it securely here until you return tomorrow, or—" "You will secure nothing," he cut her off, his tone sharpening into a command that sliced through the line. "You will remain exactly where you are. Do not let the wallet leave your sight. Do you understand me, Miss Campbell?" "Yes, sir, I understand. A driver will arrive in exactly 15 minutes. You will hand the wallet to him directly. You will not attempt conversation beyond necessary confirmation." Then his voice dropped lower, each word deliberate and weighted with threat. "And Miss Campbell, you did not open that wallet. Confirm this." Zara's breath caught. He was testing her. She'd opened it. She knew she'd opened it, and somehow, impossibly, she sensed that he already knew. But admitting it felt dangerous. Lying felt worse. She made a split-second decision, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it through the phone. I opened it only to confirm your identity, sir, to make sure I was calling the right person." A beat of silence. Then, "Honest. Good. Your integrity will be evaluated, Miss Campbell. Wait there." The line went dead with a sharp click. Zara replaced the receiver, her hand shaking violently now. She stared at the wallet on the counter, and it no longer looked like lost property. It looked like a trap. She'd done the right thing, she knew she had, but the cold certainty settling into her bones told her that by choosing integrity, she'd just signed a contract with a world she didn't understand. She'd been tested. And the most terrifying part? She didn't know if she'd passed or failed. The wait. 12 a.m., 12:15 a.m. The 15 minutes stretched into an eternity. Zara stood behind the hostess stand, clutching the wallet in both hands, her eyes locked on the glass doors that faced the street. The restaurant was silent except for the distant clatter of the kitchen staff finishing cleanup. Seoul's neon lights flickered outside blues, pinks, whites painting the empty sidewalk in artificial color. She wasn't afraid of being robbed. She was afraid of him, of the man whose voice had commanded her like she was already his to control, of what returning his wallet really meant. At exactly 12:15 a.m., headlights swept across the glass. A vehicle pulled up to the curb, a black Genesis GV80, Korea's luxury SUV, with tinted windows so dark they reflected the street like black mirrors. The engine purred, a low, expensive growl. It wasn't just transportation. It was a declaration. I own this city. The rear passenger door opened. A man stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a black overcoat that caught the wind like a cape. His face was stone-sharp, expressionless, eyes scanning the street with the trained precision of someone who'd seen violence and delivered it. He moved with deliberate calm, the kind that comes from knowing you're the most dangerous thing in the room. He pushed open the restaurant's glass door, and the chime, a delicate, crystalline sound, felt obscene in the heavy silence. His eyes found Zara immediately. "Zara Campbell." It wasn't a question. "Yes," she said quickly, sliding the wallet across the polished counter. "Here it is. Everything's inside." The man didn't move to take it immediately. Like the voice on the phone, he subjected her to a full, invasive appraisal, his gaze moving from her face to her hands to the way she stood, searching for any sign of deception, any tell that she'd tampered with the contents or planned to leverage the situation. The scrutiny made her skin crawl. Finally, he reached out. His hands were gloved black leather, and when he picked up the wallet, he didn't open it. He simply tapped it twice against his palm, verifying weight and thickness, a gesture that told her he knew exactly what should be inside. He slipped it into an interior pocket of his coat. "Mr. Lee appreciates your promptness," he said, his voice a flat baritone. He reached into another pocket and placed a thick black envelope on the counter where the wallet had been. His gratitude. "I don't need payment," Zara said quickly, putting her hands up in instinctive refusal. The envelope felt wrong, tainted, transactional, dangerous. "Seriously, it's my responsibility to return lost items. That's just how I was raised." The man's expression didn't change, but his tone gained an edge of finality. "The directive is not negotiable, Miss Campbell. Accept the exchange. It closes the transaction." Before she could argue further, he gave a curt, formal bow, shallow, perfunctory, carrying no warmth, and turned on his heel. He walked out, climbed back into the SUV, and within seconds, the vehicle glided away into Seoul's midnight traffic, disappearing like smoke. Zara stared at the empty street, then slowly, reluctantly reached for the envelope. It was heavier than it should be. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, a stack of 1,000,001, roughly $800 USD, in crisp sequential bills. More than she made in 2 weeks of brutal shifts. And beneath the money, a note on expensive cream cardstock, written in elegant handwriting. "Integrity is rare. Rarer still in a city like Seoul. You have been noticed, Miss Campbell. We will speak again. M.L." Zara's hands shook as she read the note twice, 3 times, trying to extract meaning from the sparse, ominous words. "We will speak again. Not thank you. Not, I appreciate your honesty. We will speak again." It wasn't gratitude. It was a promise. Or a warning. She tucked the note and money back into the envelope, her heart hammering against her ribs. Outside, Seoul continued its restless hum, cars passing, neon flickering, the city indifferent to the fact that her entire life had just tilted off its axis. She didn't know it yet, but that phone call, that wallet, that single moment of choosing principle over desperation, it had all been a test. And Lee Minji, the tattooed kingpin whose name made men nervous, had been watching. She'd passed. And in his world, passing meant you were valuable. Too valuable to ever let go. As Zara locked the restaurant doors and stepped into the humid Seoul night, the envelope burning in her bag and the note replaying in her mind, she didn't realize that across the city, in a penthouse office overlooking the Han River, Lee Minji sat in darkness, reviewing security footage of her finding the wallet, her hesitation, her decision to call. He replayed the moment 3 times, studying her face. And for the first time in 2 years, since the death of the woman who'd looked almost exactly like Zara Campbell, he smiled. The test was complete. The hunt had begun. 5 days later, 6:47 p.m. Zara had almost convinced herself it was over. 5 days had passed since the wallet, since the phone call, since the black SUV and the ominous note written in elegant script. 5 days of scanning every face that entered the Imperial House, her pulse jumping every time the glass doors opened, her body tensed in anticipation of something, someone. But Lee Minji never returned. The envelope with the money and the note "We will speak again" sat hidden in her apartment, tucked beneath her mattress like contraband. She hadn't spent a single one. Couldn't. Every time she considered using it to wire funds to her mother, her grandmother's voice echoed in her skull. "You sleep soundly on your own dime, child." So the money stayed hidden, and Zara tried to convince herself that the entire encounter had been a strange, isolated incident. A wealthy man, a lost wallet, a generous reward, nothing more. She'd almost succeeded. Then Mr. Han, the night manager, appeared at her station during the dinner rush, his expression unreadable. "Zara," he said, his voice clipped and formal in a way that immediately set her on edge. "My office. Now." Now. Her stomach dropped. Is everything okay? Did I do something wrong? Just come with me." His tone left no room for negotiation. Around her, the other servers, Jisoo, Minjun, Hana, all paused mid-step, their eyes tracking her movement with barely concealed curiosity. In a restaurant like the Imperial House, being summoned to the manager's office during a shift was never good. It meant a complaint, a mistake, sometimes termination. Zara untied her apron with shaking hands and followed Mr. Han through the dining room, feeling every eye on her back. Whispers rippled through the staff like wind through tall grass. What did she do? I heard she messed up a VIP order last week. No. Someone said she was rude to a client. Her heart hammered against her ribs as they walked down the narrow hallway past the kitchens, the sounds of clattering dishes and barked orders fading behind them. Mr. Han's office was at the end, a small, windowless room that smelled of stale coffee and cigarette smoke despite the building's no-smoking policy. He opened the door and stepped aside. "Go in," he said quietly, and something in his tone, something that sounded almost like pity, made her hesitate. Zara stepped through the doorway and froze. The wolf in the room. Lee Minji sat behind Mr. Han's desk as though he owned it. As though he owned the entire building. He was dressed differently than the night she'd first seen him. No longer the tailored suit from booth 14, but something more refined, more calculated. A charcoal gray blazer over a black turtleneck, expensive and understated, with a platinum watch that caught the overhead light. His tattoos were partially visible, dark ink crawling up from his collar, but covered enough to suggest restraint, control. His posture was relaxed, one arm draped casually across the back of the chair, legs crossed, but his eyes, those impossibly dark eyes, tracked her with the kind of focus that made her feel like prey. Mr. Han entered behind her, closing the door with a soft click. "Mr. Lee requested to speak with you," the manager said stiffly, positioning himself near the door like a sentry, or a prisoner. "I'll give you privacy." He left. The silence that followed was suffocating. Zara stood frozen near the doorway, her pulse roaring in her ears, trying to process the impossible scene in front of her. Why was he here? How did he get into the manager's office? What did he want? Minji's lips curved into something that might have been a smile, but his eyes remained cold, assessing. "Miss Campbell," he said, his voice smooth and deliberate, each syllable perfectly articulated. "Sit." It wasn't a request. Zara sat in the single chair across from the desk, her hands folded tightly in her lap to keep them from trembling. "You're wondering why I'm here," Minji continued, leaning forward slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "And why your manager is suddenly very accommodating." She nodded mutely. "I own 30% of this restaurant," he said simply, as though discussing the weather. "Silent partner. Your manager answers to people who answer to me. So when I requested a private meeting with one of his staff, he didn't ask questions." Zara's breath caught. "He owns part of the Imperial House?" That meant he'd been here before many times, probably watching, observing. The thought made her skin prickle. "I wanted to see you again," Minji said, his tone softening fractionally, though the underlying steel remained. "To thank you properly." You already thanked me, sir," Zara managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "The envelope, the money, that was more than generous." "Was it?" He tilted his head slightly, studying her like a specimen under glass. "You didn't spend it." Her blood turned to ice. How did he know that? Minji's smile widened, genuine amusement flickering in his eyes for the first time. "I know more about you than you think, Miss Campbell. You wire money home to Kingston every month. 300,001, sometimes more if you work doubles. Your mother, Grace Campbell, age 52, stage 2 breast cancer, waiting for surgery approval at Kingston Public Hospital. Your rent is 850,000 a month for a studio in Itaewon. You're currently 3 weeks behind." Zara's chest tightened, panic and anger flooding through her in equal measure. How do you know all that?" "Because I wanted to know," he said simply. "And because when someone impresses me, I learn everything about them." He stood slowly, rounding the desk with predatory grace, each step deliberate and measured. Zara's instinct screamed at her to run, but she forced herself to stay seated, to hold his gaze. Minji stopped a few feet away, leaning against the edge of the desk, looking down at her. "I need to tell you the truth, Miss Campbell," he said, his voice dropping to a quieter, more intimate register. "That night the wallet, it wasn't an accident." Zara's stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" "I left it there intentionally," Minji said, watching her reaction closely. "A test." The word landed like a punch. "A test?" she repeated, her voice hollow. "Someone in this restaurant," he continued, his tone hardening, "has been leaking information about my movements. When I dine here, who I meet with, how long I stay. Small details that, in my line of work, can become dangerous. So I needed to know who I could trust." He gestured vaguely toward the closed door, toward the restaurant beyond. "I left that wallet in booth 14 during a busy Friday night. Your co-workers Jisoo, Minjun, Hana, even Mr. Han all saw it. The hostess, the busboys, everyone. It sat there for 15 minutes before your shift started. Zara's mind raced, replaying that night, trying to remember who'd been working, who'd been near that booth. No one called, Minji said, his voice quiet but cutting. No one turned it in. When you found it hours later, you were the only person who chose to return it untouched. The weight of his words settled over her like a shroud. Most people, he continued, see an opportunity and take it. They justify it. He has so much he won't miss it. I need it more. It's just sitting there. But you? He leaned closer, his gaze intense, almost fascinated. You called immediately. You refused the reward. You did the right thing when no one was watching. I was raised to do the right thing, Zara said, her voice firmer now, anchored by principle even as her world tilted. That's not special. That's just basic decency. In my world, Minji said softly, basic decency is the rarest currency. He reached into his blazer and pulled out another envelope identical to the first, black and heavy. This is my gratitude, he said, placing it on the desk beside her. Not a payment, not a transaction, a thank you. For being someone I can trust in a city full of people who would sell me out for far less than what was in that wallet. Zara stared at the envelope, her hands still clenched in her lap. I don't want your money, Mr. Lee. I know, he said, and for the first time, something almost resembling respect flickered across his face. That's exactly why I'm giving it to you. He straightened, adjusting his blazer, preparing to leave. You'll see me again, Miss Campbell, he said, echoing the words from the note. Sooner than you think. Why? Zara asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. Why me? Why does it matter that I returned your wallet? Minji paused at the door, his hand on the handle, and looked back at her. His expression was unreadable, but his voice carried a weight that made her chest tighten. Because in a world built on betrayal, he said quietly, loyalty is the only thing worth protecting. And you, Miss Campbell, just proved you have it. He opened the door and was gone, his footsteps silent in the hallway. The burning weight. Zara sat frozen for a full minute, staring at the closed door, trying to process what had just happened. It was a test. The wallet, the call, the money, all of it orchestrated. She hadn't stumbled into his world by accident. She'd been invited, evaluated, and somehow, impossibly, she'd passed. Her eyes drifted to the envelope on the desk. She didn't want to touch it, didn't want to know how much was inside, but her hand moved of its own accord. She opened it slowly. Inside, $2,000,001, nearly $1,600 USD, 2 months of rent, her mother's medication, a lifeline, and beneath the cash another note. Integrity cannot be bought, but it can be rewarded. Use this how you see fit. You've earned my respect. That is more valuable than you know. M.L. Zara's hands trembled as she folded the note, tucked it back into the envelope, and stood on unsteady legs. She left Mr. Han's office in a daze, walking back into the dining room where her co-workers immediately swarmed her. What did he want? Are you in trouble? Who was that man? Nothing, Zara heard herself say, her voice distant. Just a thank you. From a customer. But as she returned to her station, the envelope burning in her apron pocket, she knew the truth. She wasn't just being thanked. She was being claimed. And Lee Minji's world, the one she'd glimpsed through a phone call and a test she didn't know she was taking, had just wrapped its fingers around her life. And it wasn't letting go. 3 weeks later, the pattern. Lee Minji became a pattern. Every Tuesday and Friday evening at precisely 8 p.m., he would arrive at the Imperial House, moving through the dining room like a shadow made flesh. He never made reservations, didn't need to. The hostess would see him approach through the glass doors and immediately, wordlessly, direct him to booth 14. And he always requested Zara. At first she thought it was coincidence, then surveillance. Now 3 weeks into this ritual, she understood it was something else entirely. A slow, deliberate courtship of trust. He never stayed long, 40 minutes, maybe an hour. His orders were consistent. Soju served neat, sometimes a small plate of galbi or japchae that he barely touched. He would sit in that corner booth, his dark eyes scanning the room with the practiced ease of a man who saw threats before they materialized, and he would watch her work. Not in a way that felt predatory or invasive, though it unsettled her all the same. It was the gaze of someone studying a valuable painting, trying to understand the brushstrokes beneath the surface. He rarely spoke to her beyond the necessities of ordering, but his presence commanded attention, The other servers noticed. Mr. Han noticed. Even the kitchen staff whispered about the tattooed man in the expensive suits who tipped in crisp bills and left the air feeling heavier after he departed. Zara tried to stay professional, polite, efficient, distant, but there was something about him that made distance impossible. His quiet intensity filled the space around him like gravity, pulling everything into his orbit whether it wanted to be there or not. And despite every instinct screaming at her to be careful, to stay away, to keep her head down, she found herself aware of him in a way that terrified her. Aware of when he arrived, when he watched her, when his gaze followed her across the dining room. She told herself it was caution. She knew it was something more dangerous. Friday, 10:47 p.m. The offer. The restaurant had emptied, the last patrons filtering out into Seoul's neon-lit streets. Zara was wiping down tables, her body moving on autopilot through the familiar closing routine, when she noticed Minji still seated in booth 14. He hadn't moved, hadn't called for the check. He simply sat there, fingers steepled beneath his chin, watching her. Her pulse quickened. She approached slowly, forcing a professional smile. "Mr. Lee, is there anything else I can get for you? We're closing soon." "Sit," he said simply, gesturing to the seat across from him. Zara hesitated. "Sir, Sit, Miss Campbell." His tone was soft, but the command beneath it was unmistakable. She slid into the booth, her hands folded tightly in her lap, hyper-aware of the empty restaurant around them, the distant sounds of the kitchen staff finishing cleanup. Minji leaned back, studying her with that unnerving intensity. "You've been avoiding me." "I haven't." "You have," he interrupted, a ghost of amusement in his voice. "You take my order, bring my food, refill my glass, and disappear. Efficient, professional, distant." Zara met his gaze, lifting her chin slightly. "I'm your server, Mr. Lee. That's my job. I'm offering you a different job." The words hung in the air between them. Zara's breath caught. What?" Minji pulled a sleek black business card from his blazer pocket and slid it across the table. Embossed in silver. Minji Lee Private Investments. "I own several legitimate businesses," he said, his voice calm and measured. "Import-export, real estate, consulting. They require someone I can trust, someone discreet, intelligent, and most importantly, honest. I want you to be my private assistant." Zara stared at the card, her mind racing. "I don't have any experience in—" "I don't need experience," Minji said, leaning forward. "I need loyalty. You proved you have that. Everything else can be taught." "Why me?" Zara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "There are hundreds of qualified people in Seoul who would sell me out the moment someone offered them more money." Minji finished. "Who would leak information, compromise deals, betray confidences. In my world, Miss Campbell, competence is common. Integrity is rare." He tapped the business card. "Triple your current salary, private health insurance for you and your mother, relocation assistance to a better apartment. And you'd be doing work that actually matters, not serving overpriced soju to entitled businessmen." It was everything she needed, everything she'd been working toward. And every instinct in her body screamed danger. "I'm grateful for the offer, Mr. Lee," Zara said carefully, pushing the card back toward him. "But I can't accept." Minji's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps, or intrigue. "Why not?" "Because I don't know what your world really involves," Zara said, her voice gaining strength. "I don't know what private assistant actually means. And I don't," she hesitated, then forced herself to continue. "I don't want to compromise who I am." For a long moment, Minji said nothing. Then his lips curved into something that might have been a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Everyone says no," he said quietly, standing and buttoning his blazer with practiced ease. "Until they need something." He left cash on the table, far more than his bill, and walked toward the exit. At the door, he paused, glancing back. "When you change your mind, Miss Campbell, call the number on that card. The offer won't wait forever." Then he was gone, disappearing into the Seoul night. Zara sat alone in the empty restaurant, staring at the business card on the table, her heart pounding and her mind screaming that she'd made the right choice. She'd said no. She'd protected herself. She'd chosen principle over temptation. But as she tucked the card into her apron pocket, telling herself it was just to throw it away later, a cold dread settled in her stomach. Because she knew, somehow, that the universe had a cruel sense of timing. The next day, the breaking point. The call came at 2:37 p.m., while Zara was half asleep after a late shift. Her landlord, Mr. Cho, spoke in rapid, business-like Korean that her phone automatically translated: rent increasing, 1,200,000 won starting next month, new lease or vacate. 1,200,000 won, nearly $1,000 USD, a 40% increase she couldn't afford. Zara was still processing the shock, calculating impossible budgets in her head, when her phone buzzed again. This time her mother's number, Grace Campbell. "Mama?" Zara answered, forcing brightness into her voice. "Baby." Her mother's voice was weak, strained. "The hospital. They moved up my surgery date. Insurance fell through. They're asking for $8,000 USD up front, or they'll reschedule for next year." Zara's world tilted. Next year. Her mother didn't have a year. "How much time do we have?" Zara asked, her voice hollow. 2 weeks, baby, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Don't apologize, Mama. I'll figure it out. I promise. She hung up and sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall of her tiny Itaewon studio, the numbers crushing her. 1,200,000 for rent. $8,000 USD, roughly 10 million won for surgery. Her current savings, 847,000 won. The math didn't work. No matter how she calculated, no matter how many extra shifts she picked up, the numbers didn't work. Her hand moved to her bag, pulling out the sleek black business card. Minji Lee Private Investments. Everyone says no until they need something. His voice echoed in her mind, prophetic and damning. Zara stared at the card for a full hour, tears streaming silently down her face, her grandmother's voice warring with her mother's. "You sleep soundly on your own dime, child." "Baby, I'm scared. I don't want to die." Finally, hands shaking, she dialed the number. He answered on the first ring. "Miss Campbell," Minji said, and she could hear the knowing smile in his voice. "I was expecting your call." "I'll take the job," Zara said, her voice barely steady. "On one condition. I need an advance. For my mother's surgery." "Done," he said without hesitation. "The money will be wired within the hour. A car will pick you up tonight at 8 p.m. Bring nothing but yourself." "Mr. Lee." "Welcome to my world, Miss Campbell." The line went dead. 8 p.m. Crossing the threshold. The black Genesis GV80 arrived exactly on time, idling outside her building like a sleek predator. The same driver from weeks ago, stone-faced, silent, opened the rear door. Zara climbed in, her small duffel bag clutched in her lap, and found Minji waiting in the back seat. He was dressed in all black turtleneck, slacks, leather gloves, and he looked like a king who'd just claimed a new piece of territory. "You made the right choice," he said simply. "I made the only choice," Zara corrected, her voice sharper than intended. Minji's lips curved into a genuine smile. "Even better." The car pulled away from the curb, merging into Seoul's neon-drenched traffic. The city blurred outside the tinted windows, blues, pinks, golds, all bleeding together like a fever dream. Zara watched her reflection in the glass, a young woman in simple clothes, a Jamaican flag pin on her collar, her eyes carrying the weight of a choice she couldn't take back. Behind her ordinary life, ahead lay Lee Minji's world, dangerous, seductive, and unforgiving. And she'd just driven straight into its center. Day 1. The threshold. The building didn't look dangerous. Nestled in Gangnam's financial district, it was a sleek tower of black glass and steel that reflected Seoul's skyline like a dark mirror. Discreet, elegant, expensive. The kind of place where power wore tailored suits and spoke in boardrooms, not back alleys. But as Zara stepped through the pristine revolving doors, following Minji through a marble lobby that smelled of leather and cold air conditioning, she felt the subtle wrongness beneath the surface. Security wasn't visible, but it was everywhere. Cameras tracked their movement with almost imperceptible rotations. 2 men in dark suits flanked the elevator banks, their earpieces barely hidden, their eyes sharp and assessing. When Minji approached, they bowed slightly, not in greeting, but in deference. The elevator ride to the 34th floor was silent except for the mechanical hum of ascent. Minji stood beside her, hands clasped behind his back, his presence filling the confined space. "Your responsibilities are simple," he said without looking at her. "Manage my schedule. Answer calls, some of which will be in Korean. You'll learn quickly. Deliver documents when I ask. And most importantly, see everything, say nothing." Zara nodded, her throat tight. The elevator doors opened onto a different world. The labyrinth. The 34th floor was a study in controlled menace. The hallway stretched in both directions, black marble floors polished to a mirror shine, walls of dark wood and tinted glass, LED lighting that cast everything in cool, shadowless illumination. Doors lined the corridor, each unmarked, each closed. No nameplates, no directories, just smooth, impenetrable surfaces that revealed nothing. And everywhere, silent men. They stood at intervals, bodyguards. Zara realized dressed identically in black tactical suits that managed to look both professional and dangerous. They didn't speak, didn't acknowledge her. But she felt their eyes tracking her movement, cataloging her presence, assessing threat levels in fractions of seconds. Minji led her to a corner office at the end of the hall, his domain. He pushed open the double doors, and Zara stepped into a space that was somehow both opulent and austere. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Han River, the city sprawling beneath them in a glittering tapestry of light. The furniture was minimalist, a massive black desk, leather chairs, a low glass table surrounded by a sectional sofa. But it was the details that unsettled her. A wall of security monitors displaying various camera feeds, a biometric safe built into the wall, and a single painting abstract, violent slashes of red and black that dominated the space like a wound. "Your desk?" Minji said, gesturing to a sleek workstation positioned outside his office door, visible through a glass partition. Close enough to be accessible, far enough to give me privacy. Zara set down her bag, her hands trembling slightly. "First rule," Minji continued, leaning against his desk, his dark eyes fixed on her. "When I have meetings, you don't enter unless I call you. You don't listen at doors. You don't ask questions about who visits or why. Understood. Second rule, some documents I give you will be sealed. You don't open them. You don't scan them. You deliver them exactly as instructed." "And third?" Zara asked, meeting his gaze. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You trust me, even when you shouldn't." The first week, surface and shadow. The work was, at first, exactly as Minji described, mundane. Zara answered calls mostly in Korean, which she fumbled through with a translation app until her ear adjusted to common phrases. She managed his calendar, blocking out meetings with names like Mr. Kang, Director Choi, the Busan contact. She brewed tea, organized files, and learned to navigate the labyrinthine office where every door required a keycard she didn't have. But beneath the surface, she began to notice the strangeness. The language people used around Minji was coded, layered with meanings she couldn't quite grasp. Phrases like, "The shipment cleared customs," said with a weight that suggested it wasn't about legal cargo. "The account has been cleaned," spoken by a nervous man in an expensive suit who left Minji's office pale and shaking. She noticed the untraceable money, cash delivered in nondescript briefcases. Wire transfers routed through accounts with names like Golden Horizon Consulting and Pacific Trade Solutions, shell companies, she suspected, designed to obscure the real flow of funds. And she noticed the disappearances. Men who came to meet with Minji tense, defiant, and left subdued, or didn't leave at all. One man, a stocky businessman who'd argued loudly behind closed doors about broken agreements, was escorted out by 2 bodyguards and never returned. When Zara asked Mr. Kwan, Minji's head of security, where the man went, Kwan simply said, he reconsidered his position. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Minji's confessions. Despite the danger simmering beneath every surface, Minji treated Zara with unnerving respect. He never raised his voice, never dismissed her questions, though his answers were often cryptic, and slowly, in fragments, he began confiding small truths. "I don't trust people," he told her one evening as she brought him tea. He was standing at the window, backlit by Seoul's glittering skyline, his reflection ghostly in the glass. "Trust is a luxury I can't afford." "Then why hire me?" Zara asked, setting the cup on his desk. He turned, his dark eyes searching hers. "Because you've already proven you're different. You had every reason to betray me to keep the money, to sell information, to leverage your position. But you didn't. That's just basic decency, Mr. Lee." "In my world," Minji said quietly, "basic decency is revolutionary." Another night, after she'd questioned a particularly vague meeting entry on his calendar, he smirked. "You're not afraid to challenge me." "Should I be?" Zara asked, holding his gaze. "Most people are," Minji said, stepping closer, his presence overwhelming. They smile, nod, obey. You question, you push back, you maintain your principles even when it's inconvenient. Is that a problem? No, he said, his voice dropping lower. It's fascinating. The way he looked at her in that moment like a puzzle he was determined to solve made her pulse quicken in a way that felt dangerous. End scene. The delivery. On Friday evening, exactly 1 week into her employment, Minji called her into his office. I need you to make a delivery, he said, handing her a black leather messenger bag. It was surprisingly heavy, the weight solid and unsettling. Where? Zara asked. Itaewon, there's a restaurant called The Red Door. Ask for Mr. Park. Give him this bag. He'll hand you an envelope. Bring it back to me. What's inside? Minji's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. You're breaking the second rule, Miss Campbell. Zara swallowed hard. Right, sorry. Sealed documents. Kwon will drive you, Minji said, returning his attention to the papers on his desk. Be efficient. The drive to Itaewon was silent except for the hum of traffic. Kwon, stoic and mountainous in the driver's seat, offered no conversation. Zara sat in the back, the messenger bag on her lap, feeling the weight of whatever was inside pressing against her thighs. She tried not to think about it. Tried to tell herself it was just documents, contracts, nothing illegal. But her instincts, the same ones that had screamed at her to return the wallet, were screaming again. The Red Door was tucked into a quiet side street, its entrance marked only by a crimson door with no signage. Kwon parked, then turned to look at her. Go in. Ask for Park. Hand over the bag. Take the envelope. Leave. Don't linger. Zara nodded and climbed out, her legs unsteady. Inside, the restaurant was dimly lit and nearly empty, just a few men seated at a corner table, their conversation stopping abruptly when she entered. A server approached, eyeing her with suspicion. I'm here to see Mr. Park, Zara said, her voice steadier than she felt. The server gestured toward a private room in the back. Zara pushed through a beaded curtain and found Mr. Park, a lean man with silver hair and cold eyes, waiting at a table. He didn't stand, didn't greet her. You're Lee's new girl, he said in accented English. I'm his assistant, Zara corrected, setting the bag on the table. Park unzipped it slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. Inside, Zara glimpsed something metallic, compact, and unmistakably dangerous, before he zipped it closed again. Her stomach dropped. Park slid a thick manila envelope across the table. Give this to Lee. Tell him the arrangements are confirmed. Zara took the envelope with numb fingers and left quickly, her heart hammering. She didn't know what was in the bag. But she knew, with cold certainty, that she'd just participated in something illegal. The Watcher. What Zara didn't see was Minji, seated in a black sedan across the street, watching her exit the red door through tinted windows. He'd been there the entire time, watching how she walked straight-backed despite the fear, how she handled the exchange professional, controlled, how she didn't run, didn't panic, didn't ask questions, she shouldn't. Kwon's voice crackled through his earpiece. She's clean, handled it perfectly. Minji leaned back, a satisfied smile touching his lips. She's ready for the next test, he murmured. Because in Lee Minji's world, every assignment was an evaluation. And Zara Campbell, honest, principled, defiant, was passing every single one. Tuesday, 9:47 p.m. The assignment. I need you to make a delivery tonight. Minji's voice was calm, clinical, as though he were asking her to mail a letter rather than venture into Seoul's night with an envelope that felt heavier than it should. Zara stood in his office doorway, her coat already on, ready to leave for the night after a grueling 10-hour shift managing back-to-back meetings and coded phone calls. But Minji's requests didn't follow schedules. They followed necessity. Where? She asked, exhaustion sharpening her tone. The Shilla Hotel, Penthouse Suite 3401. Ask for Mr. Jung Tae-sung. Minji extended a thick manila envelope, sealed with red wax bearing an embossed symbol, a tiger's head. Give him this. Wait for his response. Return here immediately. Zara took the envelope, feeling the familiar weight of dread settle in her stomach. What kind of response? Verbal confirmation, Minji said, his dark eyes watching her carefully. He'll either accept the terms or reject them. Either way, you deliver his answer to me. Nothing more. And if he... Kwon will be waiting outside, Minji interrupted, anticipating her concern. You'll be safe. The way he said it, absolute, certain, should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt like a lie. The Shilla Hotel, 10:23 p.m. The Shilla Hotel was a monument to Seoul's wealth: marble columns, crystal chandeliers, and staff who moved with choreographed precision. Zara felt impossibly out of place in her simple black slacks and blouse as she crossed the opulent lobby toward the elevators, the envelope tucked under her arm like a bomb. The elevator ascended smoothly to the 34th floor, each number ticking upward in time with her racing pulse. Penthouse Suite 3401. She stepped into a hallway lined with rich carpeting and muted lighting, found the door, and knocked twice. It opened immediately. The man standing in the doorway was not what she expected. Jung Tae-sung was older, late 50s, perhaps with silver-streaked hair slicked back, wearing an expensive silk robe over tailored slacks. His face was weathered but sharp, his eyes carrying the cold calculation of someone who'd built power through violence. And he was smiling. "Ah," he said in smooth, accented English. "Lee Minji's little messenger. Come in, come in." Every instinct screamed at Zara to refuse, to hand over the envelope and leave. But Minji's instructions had been clear. Wait for his response. She stepped inside. The suite was excessive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, leather furniture, a full bar, and two men in dark suits standing near the far wall, their eyes tracking her movement like predators sizing up prey. Jung closed the door behind her with a soft click. "You have something for me?" he asked, gesturing toward the envelope. Zara extended it. "Mr. Lee sent this. He's waiting for your response." Jung took the envelope but didn't open it. Instead, he set it on the glass coffee table and poured himself a drink whiskey, amber and slow. "You're Jamaican," he observed, swirling the glass. "That accent." "Kingston?" "Yes," Zara said carefully, staying near the door. "Interesting." Jung took a sip, his gaze appraising. "And how long have you been working for Minji?" 3 weeks. 3 weeks, he repeated, his smile widening. "And already, he trusts you with deliveries like this. Do you know what's in that envelope, miss?" "Campbell, and no, I don't." "Honest," Jung said, chuckling. "Or smart enough to lie convincingly. Either way, I respect it." He gestured to the sofa. "Sit, let's talk." "I'm just here for your response, Mr. Jung." "And I'll give it," he said, his tone hardening slightly. "But first, I'm curious. Why you? Minji doesn't trust easily. Yet here you are, new, foreign, carrying his most sensitive communications. Why?" Zara's pulse quickened. "You'd have to ask him." Jung stepped closer, and the two men near the wall shifted subtly, closing the space. "I'll tell you why," he said quietly. "You look like her." "Like who?" "His wife, Seo-yeon." Jung pulled out his phone, swiping to a photograph, and held it up. Zara's breath caught. The woman in the photo had different features: Korean, delicate, elegant, but the resemblance was unmistakable. The same warm brown eyes, the same high cheekbones, the same defiant tilt of the chin. "She died 2 years ago," Jung continued, his voice soft but cutting. "Betrayed by someone Minji trusted. He's been obsessed with loyalty ever since, testing people, watching them, trying to find someone worthy of replacing what he lost. You're not his assistant, Miss Campbell. You're his ghost." The words hit like a physical blow. "That's not," Zara started, but Jung cut her off. "Let me make you an offer," he said, setting down his glass. "I'll pay you $50,140,000 USD right now, in cash, for information. Minji's shipping schedules, his suppliers, his accounts, small details. You'd never have to see him again." Zara's mind raced. $40,000, her mother's surgery, a year of rent, freedom from this world. But the image of Minji's face, the way he'd looked at her with something almost like trust, flashed through her mind. "No," she said firmly. Jung's smile vanished. "You're refusing?" "I'm refusing," Zara repeated, moving toward the door. "And I'm leaving. Your response is expected." One of the men near the wall stepped forward, blocking her path. "I don't think you understand your situation," Jung said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You walk out of here, you're still Minji's puppet. But if you cooperate, you're free. Rich. Safe. Move," Zara said to the guard, her voice steadier than she felt. He didn't. Jung nodded once a silent command. The guard grabbed her arm, hard enough to bruise, yanking her back into the room. Zara's training from Kingston Street smart survival instincts kicked in. She twisted, driving her heel into his instep, and when his grip loosened, she shoved him back. But the second guard was already moving. He grabbed her from behind, one arm locking around her throat. Panic flooded through her as oxygen cut off, her vision blurring at the edges. Then crash. The suite door exploded inward, splintering off its hinges. Quan entered first, massive and unstoppable, his fist connecting with the guard's jaw in a sickening crunch. The man released Zara and crumpled. Two more of Minji's men flooded in, moving with practiced violence, efficient, brutal, decisive. Within seconds, both guards were on the floor, and Jung stood frozen, hands raised. Quan grabbed Zara gently, his rough hands surprisingly careful. "You okay?" She nodded, gasping for air, her throat burning. "Take her," Quan said to one of the men, then turned to Jung, his voice flat and cold. "Mr. Lee will be very interested to hear about this conversation." Headquarters, 11:34 p.m. Zara sat in Minji's office, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her hands shaking uncontrollably around a cup of tea she couldn't drink. Her throat was bruised, her arm throbbing where the guard had grabbed her. Minji stood at the window, his back to her, utterly still. The silence stretched, suffocating. "I'm sorry," Zara finally whispered. "I should have." "You didn't flinch," Minji said quietly, turning to face her. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes burned with something fierce. "You refused 50 million won. You could have taken it and disappeared. Instead, you defended me." "I didn't." "You did," he interrupted, stepping closer. "Jung is dangerous, powerful. He could have killed you, but you refused his bribe. You chose loyalty." Zara looked up at him, her voice breaking. "Was that another test?" Minji's silence was answer enough. Tears of exhaustion and anger burned in her eyes. "You sent me in there knowing what would happen." "I sent you in there protected," Minji corrected, his voice hard. "Quan never left the building. The room was monitored. If Jiang had hurt you, he'd be dead right now." "That doesn't make it okay." "No," Minji agreed, crouching in front of her so they were eye level. "But it makes you invaluable. You're better than the men I trust, Miss Campbell. Stronger, more loyal. And now you understand the world you've entered." Zara met his gaze, and the truth settled over her like chains. Every task was a test. The wallet, the delivery to the red door, tonight. All of it orchestrated, calculated, designed to measure her worth in a world where loyalty was currency and betrayal meant death. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. Minji's expression softened fractionally. "Yes, you can, because you already have." He stood, returning to his desk. "Go home, rest. Tomorrow, we'll discuss what comes next." As Zara left, her legs unsteady, she realized the horrifying truth. She couldn't leave. Not because he wouldn't let her, but because she'd already passed too many tests. And in Lee Minji's world, once you proved your loyalty, you belonged to him. Forever. Thursday, 1:47 a.m., the intrusion. Zara shouldn't have been there. She should have been home, asleep in her new apartment, the one Minji had arranged for her in a secure building in Hanamdong, where the rent was paid 6 months in advance and the view overlooked the glittering Han River. She should have been grateful, compliant, obedient. Instead, she stood outside Minji's private office on the empty 34th floor, her keycard granted 3 weeks ago for emergency access hovering over the biometric reader. The building was silent except for the low hum of ventilation systems and the distant sound of traffic far below. The security guards had completed their sweep an hour ago. She'd watched them from the stairwell, counting the minutes until the floor was clear. She told herself she was here for answers, that the questions swirling in her mind since the hotel incident. Why me? What does he really want? Am I just a ghost he's trying to resurrect? Justified this invasion of privacy. But the truth was simpler, more dangerous. She needed to know if Jung Tae-sung had been telling the truth. Zara swiped the keycard. The lock disengaged with a soft click. She pushed open the door and slipped inside. The search. Minji's office at night was different, more intimate, more vulnerable. Moonlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the minimalist furniture. His desk was clear except for a single lamp, a laptop closed like a sleeping predator, and a glass of unfinished whiskey that still smelled faintly of smoke and oak. Zara moved carefully, her phone's flashlight cutting narrow beams through the darkness. She didn't know what she was looking for: files, photographs, anything that would explain the hold he had over her. She checked the desk drawers first locked. The filing cabinet's biometric security she couldn't bypass. The bookshelf held volumes in Korean and English. Philosophy, military strategy, Sun Tzu's Art of War. Then she saw it. On a shelf behind his desk, displayed almost reverently in a glass case, was the black leather wallet, the same one she'd found months ago at the Imperial House. The one that had started everything. Her breath caught. Why would he keep it? Why display it like an artifact? Zara glanced at the door, her heart hammering, then carefully opened the glass case. The wallet felt exactly as she remembered. Heavy, expensive, significant. But when she opened it, her hands trembled. No cash, no platinum card, no business cards. Just a single photograph, tucked into the billfold. A woman stared back at her. She was breathtaking, delicate Korean features. Long, dark hair swept over one shoulder, wearing a simple white dress. But it was her eyes that froze Zara in place. Warm, intelligent, defiant. The same high cheekbones. The same determined set of the jaw. Jeong had been right. She looked exactly like her. Her name was Seo-yeon. Zara spun around, the wallet slipping from her hands and hitting the floor with a dull thud. Minji stood in the doorway, backlit by the hallway lights, his silhouette sharp and unreadable. He wasn't wearing his usual tailored suits, just a black shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing the intricate tattoos that wound up his forearms like dark poetry. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a quiet finality. "Mr. Lee, Zara's voice broke. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have tenfaded." "No," Minji said softly, moving toward her with measured steps. "You shouldn't have. But I'm not surprised." He bent down, picked up the wallet, and stared at the photograph for a long moment, his expression unguarded in a way she'd never seen. "Lee So-yeon," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that filled the room. "My wife." Zara's throat tightened. "Jeong told me." "That you look like her," Minji finished, glancing up. He wasn't wrong. He moved to the window, the photograph still in his hand, his reflection ghostly in the glass. "She died 2 years ago. Not from illness, not from an accident." His voice hardened. "She was murdered. By someone I trusted." Zara felt the air leave her lungs. "Minji." "He was my lieutenant," Minji continued, his tone devoid of emotion now, clinical and cold. "Someone I'd known since we were teenagers. Someone I would have died for. He took money from a rival 100 million won to give them information about my movements. Seo-yeon was with me that night. When they came for me, He paused, his jaw tightening. She stepped in front of the bullet meant for me. The silence that followed was suffocating. "I killed him," Minji said simply. "And everyone who helped him. But it didn't bring her back. It didn't fix the fact that I'd trusted the wrong person." He turned to face Zara, and for the first time, she saw something raw in his eyes, grief, buried beneath layers of control but still bleeding through. "Since then," he said, "I've tested everyone, every employee, every associate, every person who enters my world. I test them to see if they'll betray me the moment it's convenient, if they'll choose money over loyalty, if they'll put a knife in my back when I'm not looking." "The wallet," Zara whispered, understanding dawning. "It was never about the money." "No," Minji agreed. "It was about seeing who you were when no one was watching. And you," he stepped closer, his gaze intense. "You called me. You refused the reward. You've refused bribes, threats, every temptation I've placed in front of you. You've passed every test." "Because I'm a replacement," Zara said, her voice breaking with anger and sorrow. "Because I remind you of her." Minji's expression shifted, pain flashing across his features before he locked it away. "At first," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe that's what it was. When I saw you that first night, your face, your eyes, the way you stood, like you'd fight the world if you had to, I saw her. And I wanted to know if you were real or just another illusion." He reached out slowly, his fingers brushing the edge of her jaw, and Zara should have pulled away but couldn't. "But you're not her," Minji said softly. "You're stronger. You're surviving in a foreign country with nothing but your integrity. You're fighting for your mother with everything you have. You're standing in my world, a world that chews up people like you and you haven't broken." Tears burned in Zara's eyes. "I'm not strong. I'm terrified. Every day, I'm terrified." "That's what makes you strong," Minji said. "You're afraid, but you don't run. You don't compromise. You don't bend." He stepped back, his hand falling away, and the distance between them felt like a chasm. I test everyone, Zara, he said quietly, using her first name for the first time, and the intimacy of it shattered something inside her. I test them because I can't afford to be wrong again, but somehow, his voice caught, and he looked away. Somehow, I want you to pass. The confession hung in the air, vulnerable and dangerous. Zara stared at him, this tattooed kingpin who ruled Soul's shadows, who tested loyalty like currency, who'd built walls so high no one could reach him. And she saw, beneath all of it, a man who'd lost everything and was terrified to hope again. I'm not her, Zara said, her voice trembling but firm. I'll never be her. I know, Minji whispered. And I don't want to be tested anymore. He met her gaze, and something shifted in his expression, something raw and honest. Then tell me to stop. Zara opened her mouth, the words right there. Stop. Let me go. Release me from this. But they wouldn't come. Because the terrifying truth was that she didn't want him to stop. Not the tests. Not the dangerous proximity. Not the way he looked at her like she was the only thing in his world worth protecting. I can't, she whispered. Minji closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. And when he opened them again, the vulnerability was gone, replaced by the controlled mask he always wore. Then you understand, he said simply. You're not leaving. Not because I won't let you, but because you've already chosen to stay. He was right. And as Zara left his office, the photograph of Seo Yun burned into her memory. She realized the horrible, beautiful truth. She wasn't just being tested anymore. She was falling. Into his world, into his orbit, into the dangerous space between loyalty and something far more consuming. And there was no turning back. Friday, 7:13 p.m. The summons. The text came during Zara's lunch break, short and impersonal. Dinner tonight, 8 p.m. Formal dress. Don't be late. K. Kwan never sent casual invitations. And Minji's dinners were never just meals, they were performances. Carefully orchestrated displays of power, where business was conducted under the guise of hospitality and alliances were forged or shattered over expensive cuts of beef. But something about this summons felt different. Colder. More ominous. Zara arrived at Mingle's, an exclusive restaurant in Gangnam that required reservations months in advance, unless your name was Lee Minji. She wore the only formal dress she owned, a simple black sheath that Minji's stylist had sent to her apartment weeks ago, along with a note that read, "For occasions that require armor." Now, standing in the restaurant's private room, she understood why. The stage. The private dining room was designed for intimidation. A long ebony table dominated the space, set with pristine white china and crystal glasses that caught the ambient lighting like ice. 8 chairs, 8 place settings. And at the head of the table, Lee Minji, dressed in a charcoal 3-piece suit that made him look like a king presiding over a tribunal. But it wasn't Minji who made Zara's stomach drop. It was the men seated around the table. Kwan, stoic as ever, sat to Minji's right. Beside him, Director Choi, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who managed Minji's consulting operations. Across from them, 2 other lieutenants Zara recognized from headquarters, Mr. Han, the silent enforcer, and Park Ji-hoon, the logistics coordinator. And at the far end, directly opposite Minji, sat Yoon Dae-jung, Minji's second-in-command, a man in his early 40s with slicked-back hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. He'd always watched Zara with barely concealed contempt, his gaze tracking her movements through headquarters like she was an insect he was waiting to crush. Tonight, that contempt had sharpened into something predatory. "Miss Campbell," Minji said, his voice perfectly neutral. "Please, sit." He gestured to the empty chair directly to his left, a position of proximity, but also exposure. Every eye at the table would be on her. Zara sat, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. A server appeared, pouring water and wine with choreographed precision, then disappeared like smoke. "We have business to discuss tonight," Minji continued, his gaze sweeping the table. "But first, we eat." The prelude. The meal was exquisite and unbearable. Course after course arrived, gooey grilled meats, delicate banchan side dishes, perfectly steamed rice, but Zara could barely taste any of it. The tension in the room was suffocating, pressing against her chest like a physical weight. Conversation flowed around her in Korean, too rapid for her still developing comprehension, but she caught fragments, shipments, accounts, territory, business as usual. Yet beneath it all, she sensed something coiling, waiting to strike. Finally, as the dessert course was cleared, Minji leaned back in his chair, his dark eyes scanning the table. "Now," he said, switching to English, a deliberate choice that made Zara's pulse spike. "Let's discuss the real reason we're here." He gestured to Yoon Dae-jung. "Director Yoon has brought a concern to my attention. I thought it best addressed publicly." Yoon straightened, his expression carefully neutral, but satisfaction gleamed in his eyes. "Thank you, sir." He turned his gaze to Zara, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. 3 days ago, Yoon began, his English precise and cutting. "Sensitive information about one of our Busan shipments was leaked to the Jade Serpent gang. They intercepted the delivery, costing us 80 million won and 3 months of negotiation." Murmurs rippled around the table. "The leak," Yoon continued, his voice hardening, "came from someone with access to scheduling systems and confidential communications. Someone new to the organization. Someone who might have outside loyalties." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Someone like Miss Campbell." The accusation hit like a gunshot. Every eye turned to Zara. She felt the weight of their suspicion, their judgment, pressing down on her like crushing gravity. Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to meet Yoon's gaze directly. "That's a serious allegation, Director Yoon," Minji said quietly, his tone unreadable. "Do you have evidence?" "The leak occurred during her 3rd week of employment," Yoon said, pulling out a tablet and sliding it across the table toward Minji. "She had access to the shipping manifests. She's foreign, which makes her a risk. And frankly, sir, we know nothing about her loyalties beyond a single returned wallet." He turned back to Zara, his smile cold. "Perhaps Miss Campbell would like to explain how the Jade Serpents knew the exact time and route of a shipment she scheduled." Zara's heart hammered against her ribs. She could feel Minji's gaze on her, assessing, waiting. "I didn't leak anything," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I don't even know who the Jade Serpents are." "Convenient ignorance," Yoon said smoothly. "It's the truth." "Or," Yoon pressed, leaning forward, "you saw an opportunity. A foreign woman, desperate for money, working for a man whose business she doesn't understand. Maybe someone made you an offer. Maybe you needed the cash more than you needed integrity." "That's not enough," Minji said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Silence fell instantly. Minji's gaze remained fixed on Zara, dark and unreadable. "Miss Campbell, stand." Zara stood, her legs unsteady, feeling like a prisoner awaiting sentencing. "You've been accused of betrayal," Minji said, his tone flat, judicial. "Leaking information that cost this organization millions and put lives at risk. If true, the penalty is severe. Do you understand?" Zara's mouth was dry, but she nodded. "Yes." "Then defend yourself." The room waited, predatory and still. Zara took a breath, forcing her voice to remain calm despite the terror clawing at her chest. "Director Yoon is right about one thing: I am foreign. I am new. And I did need money desperately." She met Minji's gaze. "But if I wanted to steal from you, I wouldn't have returned your wallet." The words landed with quiet force. "I could have kept the cash," Zara continued, her voice gaining strength. "I could have taken the reward and disappeared. I could have accepted Jung Tae-sung's bribe, 50 million won to betray you. But I didn't, not because I'm afraid of you. Because it's wrong." She turned to Yoon, her defiance sharp and clear. "You don't know me. You don't trust me. But I've proven my integrity more than once. So before you accuse me of betrayal, ask yourself who else had access to those schedules. Who else stands to gain by removing me from this organization?" Yoon's expression darkened. "Are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting," Zara interrupted, her voice like steel, "that you're looking at the wrong person." The silence that followed was absolute. Minji stood slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. He walked around the table, his footsteps echoing in the quiet, until he stood directly behind Zara's chair. "Director Yoon," he said softly, dangerously, "you've made a serious accusation. But I've watched Miss Campbell for months. I've tested her repeatedly, and she's passed every single time." He placed a hand on Zara's shoulder, a gesture of protection that sent shockwaves through the room. "She's the only one I trust here," Minji said, his voice carrying absolute authority. "The only one whose loyalty I don't question. So if there's a leak in this organization, it's not her." He turned his gaze to Yoon, and the temperature dropped further. "It's someone who's been here long enough to become comfortable, someone who thinks they're untouchable." Yoon's face went pale. "Kwon," Minji said quietly, Escort Director Yoon out. He's relieved of his duties, effective immediately. His accounts will be frozen. His access revoked. He's done. Sir, Yoon started, panic breaking through his composure. Out, Minji said, his voice flat and final. Kwon stood, and 2 other security personnel materialized from the shadows. Yoon was escorted from the room, his protests fading down the hallway. The soju. When the door closed, Minji returned to his seat and gestured for Zara to sit as well. The remaining men at the table sat in stunned silence. Minji reached for the bottle of soju at the center of the table, premium, aged, expensive, and poured a glass. But instead of drinking it himself, he stood and walked to Zara's place setting. He poured her glass personally, the clear liquid catching the light, then set the bottle down and met her eyes. In Korean culture, Zara knew, having someone of higher status pour your drink was a profound gesture. It signified respect, equality, trust. Minji raised his own glass. To loyalty, he said softly. Zara lifted hers with trembling hands. To loyalty. They drank. And in that moment, as the soju burned down her throat, and Minji's gaze held hers with something that looked almost like pride, Zara understood. She was no longer just an employee. She was his confidant, his ally, and perhaps, most dangerously, someone he was allowing himself to trust. Saturday, 2:34 a.m. The awakening. The pounding on Zara's apartment door wasn't polite. It was violent fists hammering against steel with the kind of urgency that meant life or death. She jolted awake, her heart already racing, adrenaline flooding her system before her mind fully processed what was happening. The digital clock on her nightstand glowed 2:34 a.m. in accusatory red numbers. The pounding continued, relentless. Miss Campbell, a voice she recognized, Mr. Han, one of Minji's enforcers. Open the door, now. Zara stumbled out of bed, pulling on sweatpants over her sleep shorts, and ran to the door. She fumbled with the locks, her hands shaking, and yanked it open. Han stood in the hallway, his usually impassive face twisted with something that looked disturbingly like fear. Behind him, another of Minji's men sung, younger, his shirt spattered with something dark and wet. Blood. What happened? Zara demanded, her nursing instincts kicking in even before her conscious mind caught up. Are you hurt? Not us, Han said, grabbing her arm. Mr. Lee, he's been attacked, stabbed. The doctor is stuck in Incheon traffic accident on the bridge. We need you. Now. The world tilted. I'm not I worked as a nursing assistant for 6 months. I'm not qualified to. You're all we have. Han cut her off, already pulling her toward the elevator. Bring anything medical you have. We don't have time. Zara's mind raced. She ran back inside, grabbed the small first aid kit she kept under the bathroom sink, basic supplies, bandages, antiseptic, and her phone. It felt pathetically inadequate, but she followed them anyway. The mansion, 251 a.m. Minji's home wasn't in the city center. It was a fortress hidden in the hills of Seongbuk-dong, a sprawling modern estate surrounded by high walls, security cameras, and guards who moved like shadows. Tonight, those defenses had failed. The black SUV screeched to a stop in the circular driveway, and Zara was pulled through the mansion's entrance into chaos. Men shouted in rapid Korean, their voices tight with panic. Security personnel moved through the hallways like ghosts, checking rooms, securing perimeters. And in the center of it all, in what looked like a massive living room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seoul's glittering skyline, Lee Minji lay on a leather sofa, his white shirt soaked crimson. Zara's breath caught. He was conscious barely, his face pale as death, his jaw clenched against pain. Kwon knelt beside him, pressing a blood-soaked towel against Minji's left side, his massive hands surprisingly gentle. How long ago? Zara asked, dropping to her knees beside them, her training overriding her terror. 15 minutes, Kwon said, his voice strained. Ambush in the parking garage. 2 men. We killed them both, but... His expression darkened. The blade went deep. Zara pulled the towel away, and her stomach lurched. The wound was low, just above his hip, a puncture roughly 3 inches long, bleeding heavily but not spurting, not arterial, thank God, but deep enough to be life-threatening if it had nicked an organ. I need light, Zara said, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her chest. Boil water, clean towels, alcohol medical, not drinking. Needle and thread if you have suture supplies. If not, Get me the strongest thread you can find and sterilize it. The men stared at her. Move! She barked, and the authority in her voice, honed from 6 months assisting surgeons in Kingston's understaffed public hospital, cut through their shock. They scattered. Zara turned back to Minji, whose dark eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that was almost unbearable. You're going to be okay, she said, pressing fresh towels against the wound. But I need you to stay awake. Talk to me. Zara. His voice was weak, strained. You don't have to. Shut up, she said, more gently than the words implied. Save your energy. The fight for life. The next 40 minutes were a blur of controlled chaos. Zara worked with the precision of someone who'd seen trauma up close, not as a fully trained nurse, but as someone who'd held pressure on gunshot wounds while doctors operated, who'd learned to read bodies and trust instinct when time was the difference between life and death. She cleaned the wound with boiled water and medical alcohol, ignoring Minji's sharp intake of breath when the antiseptic burned. The cut was deep, but clean the blade had missed major organs by millimeters. Luck. Impossible, undeserved luck. I'm going to stitch this, Zara said, threading the sterilized needle with hands that had stopped shaking the moment she'd started working. We don't have anesthetic. This is going to hurt. Minji's laugh was bitter and breathless. Won't be. The first time. She began stitching small, precise sutures that closed the wound layer by layer. Minji's jaw clenched so hard she thought his teeth might crack. But he didn't cry out, didn't flinch. He just watched her with those impossibly dark eyes, as though memorizing every detail of her face. Who did this? Zara asked, trying to distract him. Jade's serpents, Minji said through gritted teeth. Retaliation. For Yoon. They came for you because you protected me, Zara realized, guilt flooding through her. No. Minji's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist with surprising strength. They came. Because I've made enemies. You're the only reason. I'm still alive. His composure was cracking the iron control he always maintained, splintering under pain and blood loss. His breathing was ragged, his skin clammy with shock. Stay with me, Zara said firmly, tying off the final suture. You don't get to die tonight. I forbid it. Minji's lips curved into the ghost of a smile. You're very bossy. You're very stubborn. She wrapped clean bandages around his torso, her hands steady despite the blood coating her fingers. Around them, Minji's men watched in stunned silence this foreign woman, barely trained, holding their boss together through sheer determination. As Zara secured the final bandage, Minji's hand found hers, his grip weak but deliberate. Zara, he whispered, his voice raw and vulnerable in a way she'd never heard. You're the only one who never lied to me. The confession hit like a physical blow. Not gratitude, not obligation, but something deeper, trust, offered by a man who'd built his entire life on walls and tests, and the assumption that everyone would eventually betray him. I'm not lying now, Zara said softly, squeezing his hand. You're going to survive this. Minji's eyes fluttered closed, his breathing evening out as the adrenaline ebbed and exhaustion took over. Don't leave, he murmured, barely audible. I won't, Zara promised. Hours later, 6:17 a.m. Dawn broke over Seoul in shades of pink and gold, the city waking to another day while inside the fortress, time had stopped. The doctor had finally arrived 2 hours ago, examined Zara's work with raised eyebrows, and declared that she'd likely saved Minji's life. He'd administered antibiotics, set up an IV, and confirmed that no major organs had been damaged. Minji was stable, sleeping, alive. Zara sat in a chair beside his bed, a massive 4-poster in a bedroom that looked more like a museum than a living space, her hands still stained with his blood despite 3 attempts at washing them. She stared at those stains, her mind numb with exhaustion and realization. She'd saved him. Not because he was her employer, not because she feared what would happen if he died, but because the thought of a world without Lee Minji dangerous, broken, impossibly complicated Lee Minji was unbearable. Somewhere along the way, she'd stopped being just part of his tests. She'd become the person who saw past the tattoos and the violence and the carefully constructed walls. She'd become the one who challenged him, defied him, and somehow made him want to be better. She was keeping him human in a world designed to strip humanity away. And as the morning light filtered through the curtains, catching the silver in Minji's dark hair, Zara understood the terrifying truth. She wasn't falling into his world anymore. She'd already fallen. Completely. irrevocably. And there was no way out that didn't destroy them both. 10 days later, the distance. Minji survived, but something between them died. He recovered quickly, too quickly perhaps, driven by pride and the refusal to show weakness. Within 3 days, he was back at his desk, issuing orders with the same cold precision, his wound hidden beneath tailored suits that cost more than most people's monthly salary. But he wouldn't look at Zara. Not directly. Not the way he had before, with that intensity that made her feel seen, understood, valued. Now, when she entered his office with reports or messages, he barely glanced up. His responses were clipped, professional, distant. Leave it on the desk. Cancel the 3 p.m. meeting. That will be all, Miss Campbell. Miss Campbell. Not Zara. Never Zara anymore. It was as though the man who'd whispered, "You're the only one who never lied to me," while bleeding out on his sofa, had been replaced by a stranger wearing his face. At first, Zara told herself it was recovery, pain medication, exhaustion, the trauma of nearly dying. But as the days stretched into a week, then longer, she understood the truth. He was punishing himself for being vulnerable, for letting her see him weak, for needing her, for trusting her with his life and, more dangerously, with the cracks in his armor. And Zara realized, with crushing clarity, that she couldn't do this anymore. Thursday, 4:47 p.m., the resignation. She found him in his office as the sun began its descent over Seoul, painting the Han River in shades of amber and gold. He stood at the window, his favorite position, the place where he watched his empire from a distance, untouchable and alone. Zara knocked once, then entered without waiting for permission. "Mr. Lee," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. "I'm resigning." That got his attention. He turned slowly, his expression unreadable, but something flickered in his dark eyes, surprise, perhaps, or the faintest trace of pain. "Resigning," he repeated flatly. "Effective immediately." Zara placed a sealed envelope on his desk, her formal letter, typed that morning in her apartment while tears she refused to shed burned behind her eyes. "I'm grateful for the opportunity, but I can't." Her voice caught. "I can't do this anymore." Minji moved toward her with that predatory grace, each step measured and deliberate, until he stood close enough that she could smell the faint trace of his cologne, sandalwood, and smoke. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Because you won't even look at me," Zara said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Because I saved your life and now you treat me like a stranger. Because I don't know what you want from me anymore, and I'm tired of guessing." "What I want." Minji's laugh was bitter, hollow. "You think you know what I want?" "I know you're afraid," Zara shot back, her defiance returning. "Afraid that caring about someone makes you weak, that needing someone gives them power over you. So you push me away before I can hurt you first." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Minji did something unexpected. He smiled. Not the cold, calculated smile he wore in boardrooms, but something genuine and almost sad. "You're right," he said softly, "about all of it." He walked back to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a folder, thick, worn, filled with photographs and documents. He tossed it onto the desk in front of her. "Open it." Zara hesitated, then lifted the cover. Her breath stopped. Inside were photographs of her, dozens of them. Zara leaving her old apartment building in Itaewon. Zara at the convenience store, counting coins to buy instant noodles. Zara at the Imperial House, before she ever found his wallet, serving tables with exhausted determination. Time-stamped. Dated. Some going back 3 months before that night in booth 14. "What is this?" Zara whispered, her hands trembling. "The truth," Minji said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You were never a random choice, Zara. I'd been watching you for weeks. I saw how you worked, honest, tireless, kind to people who didn't deserve it. I saw you wire money home to your mother when you barely had enough to eat. I saw you return a customer's dropped wallet with 50,001 inside when no one was looking." Zara felt the ground shift beneath her. "The wallet in booth 14 wasn't a test for the staff," Minji continued. "It was a test for you. I wanted to see what you'd do when temptation was overwhelming. When no one would ever know if you kept it. And you," his voice softened fractionally, "you called me immediately. You proved what I'd suspected. That you were exactly what I'd been searching for. So this entire time," Zara's voice broke, "everything was a lie? You manipulated me into this?" "No." Minji stepped closer, his gaze intense. "I gave you a choice. Every step of the way, you chose. To return the wallet. To take the job. To refuse bribes. To save my life. I tested you, yes, but you passed because of who you are, not because I told you how to act. Tears burned in Zara's eyes. Why tell me this now? Because you deserve the truth. Minji reached into his jacket and pulled out a passport, a credit card, and a thick envelope. He placed them on the desk beside the folder. And because I'm giving you a choice, one final choice. Zara stared at the items, her heart pounding. The passport is yours expedited, legitimate, Minji said quietly. The credit card has 100 million, one enough to start over anywhere in the world. The envelope contains your mother's surgery confirmation fully paid, scheduled for next month. Everything I promised you. Fulfilled. He stepped back, his expression guarded but honest. You can leave, he said. Right now. Walk out that door, fly to Jamaica, live your life free of this world. I won't stop you. I won't follow you. You'll be safe. Or, Zara whispered. Or you stay, Minji said, his voice dropping lower, more vulnerable. Not as my employee, not as someone I test. You stay as my equal. You help me build something better than what I inherited. You challenge me. You keep me human. And together, we rule this world on our terms. The weight of the choice crushed down on Zara's chest. Leave and spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, wondering if the Jade Serpents or Minji's enemies would find her, wondering if she'd ever feel as alive as she did in his dangerous orbit. Or stay and lose the last remnants of her innocence, becoming part of the violence and corruption she'd always sworn to resist. Those aren't the only choices, Zara said finally, her voice steady. Minji's eyebrows lifted fractionally. I'll stay, she continued, meeting his gaze with unwavering resolve. But on my terms. I won't be your queen or your equal in your empire. I'll be your conscience. The person who tells you no when you go too far. Who reminds you that power without principle is just tyranny. I'll help you build something better, but I won't compromise who I am to do it. A long silence stretched between them, taut and electric. Then Minji smiled genuinely, fully, the walls finally crumbling. You're impossible, he said softly. You're a manipulative crime lord, Zara countered. And yet, here we are. He stepped closer, into the space that was too intimate, too dangerous. And for the first time since the attack, he looked at her the way he had before really looked, seeing all of her. Then prove it, Minji said, his voice low and challenging. Prove you can stay in my world without breaking. Zara held his gaze, unflinching. I already did, she said quietly. The night I called you. The words hung in the air between them, a reminder of the beginning. The moment she'd chosen integrity over survival, honesty over convenience. The moment she'd unknowingly set this entire impossible story in motion. Minji's expression softened, and for just a heartbeat, he looked almost peaceful. Then welcome home, Zara Campbell. Dawn over Seoul. As morning broke over the city, soft pinks and golds bleeding across the skyline, the Han River glittering like scattered diamonds, Zara stood at the window beside Minji, watching his empire wake. She wore her simple black work clothes, her hair pulled back in a practical bun, but pinned to her collar, small but unmistakable.